Test Palais Wilson pour le ground floor, 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Est-ce OK pour toi? Canal anglais, le canal 2.
Good morning. I call to order meeting number 37 of the 78th session of the Committee on Economic, Social and Cultural Rights. It is my great pleasure to once again welcome this morning the distinguished delegation of Colombia and the head of delegation, Ambassador Gustavo Galeon Giraldo. I would also like to welcome all those observing the dialogue in person and through webcast. We would like then to invite the delegation to continue responding to any questions pending from Cluster 2 for a maximum of 15 minutes, Your Excellency, after which we would proceed to respond to questions posed yesterday on Cluster 3 by Ms. Rossi, and that will be about 30 minutes. After that, follow-up questions to all the clusters will be posed, and then Ms. Laura Maria Crachinio-Tatu will pose questions on Cluster 4, and the delegation will have thereafter another 30 minutes to respond to those. To facilitate this process and enable us to cover the full range of issues at hand, I would like to invite my colleagues and the distinguished delegation to speak in a concise manner, giving due attention to the time allocation and also the speed at which you speak to facilitate the interpreters. With this, I have the pleasure to give the floor to the delegation. Thank you, Your Excellency.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, distinguished committee members. A very good morning to all of you, and you can certainly count on our participation, and our greetings to civil society members that are here with us too. We thank them for their participation and contribution to this exercise. I'd like to give the floor to Gloria Cuartas, who's the director of our implementation unit for the peace agreement. And she can address some of the questions asked earlier in about 5 minutes. A microphone for the speaker, please.
Gracias.
Thank you. Madam Chair, distinguished committee members. I wanted to refer to the questions on corruption, efficacy in social expenditure, poverty and equality. And these were questions that you've put to us in the previous meeting. As part of the 7th report submission, let me emphasize that our approach stems from the implementation of the final peace agreement. The understanding is that our development plan, which was built together with our citizenry, focuses on peace for Colombia. And this is our roadmap as a state in order to close historic gaps and make sure that we have economic, social, and cultural gains. Now, on corruption and social expenditure, these are questions 6.3 and 6.5. The peace agreement recognizes that corruption and inefficient use of public expenditure undermine public confidence and contribute to bringing about inequality. And this is why we have been promoting social oversight mechanisms as part of our implementation of the agreement. So we want to bring about peace. And this is one of the fundamental goals that we are disseminating around the country, and this has a very close link to public expenditure. Now, when we think about implementation of the agreement, it's important to remember that there is an implementation framework which includes our internal roadmap to follow up on the agreement. We also established the commitments of the state of Colombia. And 75% of the commitments made in the agreement are constantly being monitored in terms of the results achieved. We must remember that all public expenditure through the ministries are subjected to this verification exercise. Now, there is an annual assessment of this indicator, and at the round table of 2024, we saw 63% progress. And this has partly made up the shortfall. So we are working to progress on implementation to make sure that there is proper oversight of public expenditure. And this is part of the post-conflict information system. And this is an exercise which involves the 61 state authorities. Now, this is an assessment which can see some variation in the short term, because as part of the implementation framework, we agreed a process which allowed us to identify 77 new indicators. And 123 indicators were determined as needing adjustment. Now, this means that the follow-up mechanism for the agreement ensures that there is accountability and independent oversight. The follow-up commission to verify the verifies the implementation. But on top of this, every 3 months, a public report is produced for the United Nations, which rigorously gives a picture of progress made and the challenges that still remained. And we have done this together with the National Awareness Raising Committee, the Prosecution Service, the Inspector General's Office, looking at investigating and sanctioning cases of corruption. We have been looking at the whole system of public procurement and the digital procurement system, and all of this to ensure that there is greater citizens' oversight and transparency in the granting of state contracts. There have been disciplinary and criminal proceedings initiated in relation to symbolic cases relating to contracts, infrastructure, health, education, and these cases are now being investigated. The Comptroller General's Office has adopted a strategy called Commitment for Colombia in order to involve civil society organizations in oversight and follow-up activities. We have a comprehensive guarantee program which includes transparency mechanisms and citizens' oversight. So ultimately, combating corruption in Colombia involves a far-reaching process. And Gustavo Petro has mobilized the commitment of all of the authorities and the ministers. Everyone is involved in the process. We haven't just looked at sanctions, but we've also mobilized the citizenry, all in a bid to ensure that public expenditure actually reaches the targeted communities. Let me now swiftly move on to poverty and inequality. Now, there were recommendations on rules that were made by the Land Renewal Territory and other authorities. And as a result of this, proposals were made for different methodologies in the 69th session of the administrative collegiate body managing resources. So the resources of royalties, for example, represent a significant contribution to income generation. And this was put in place in order to avoid the way that resources and income were treated pursuant to Law 2294. Previously, we had a model working in a specific way, which ensured that 54% of resources were all allocated in 5 out of the 16 Colombian subregions, which meant that 7 municipalities or local authorities were left with no resources at all up to 2022. Now we've moved on from this system, and the new system turns this on its head, and it does ensure that the resources actually reach the territories that need them most. During the current government, we now have a legal methodology in order to assign priority and allocate resources with a focus on peace. And the new approach tries to make up for historic inequalities that came about as a result of the conflict, and to try and level up the poverty situation. We want to do away with any socioeconomic gaps and areas of weakness, and we want to have detailed criteria for this. I think it's very important to point out that the government of Gustavo Petro is the one that has changed the process whereby certain resources were targeted at certain groups and political priorities. And the government has paved the way for new equal opportunities throughout the country. Law 2472 of 2025 has put in place affirmative action for rural women, for rural fishers and farm workers, for example, looking at land, measures relating to land as well. And this reform has really also focused our attention on how land used to be distributed and managed.
Salinas.
Thank you very much. I give the floor to Santiago Salinas from the Ministry of Equality. Just a couple of minutes, because we don't have a lot of time available. Thank you. Thank you, Your Excellency. I will try and be very specific. Looking at measures put in place by the state to provide specific disaggregated information on persons with disabilities. Through the statistical department, we have a census or a central register for persons with disabilities in the workplace. There is a periodic questionnaire using a sampling system to cover the whole country. Relating to guarantees on social welfare for persons with disabilities, we must emphasize that there has been progress as a result of a solidarity pillar having been introduced into the pension system. This does not just benefit persons with disabilities that don't manage to have income equivalent to a pension, but it also covers those persons that, because of their caring activities, were not able to make sufficient contributions. They are also covered by this solidarity pillar, so it has provided better coverage and benefits. Now, there was a further questions about public policy, which is currently being updated, and the Council on Disabilities, together with the Presidency of the Republic and other authorities, are working to update this system, ensuring that it is in line on the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, so that it covers the period 2025 to 35. So that's what I can tell you in this regard.
Palabra.
Thank you. I now give the floor to Dr. Ortegon, Human Rights Director within the Ministry of the Interior. Thank you, Ambassador. Madam Chair, committee members, there were questions in Cluster 2 on trafficking. We wanted to inform you that our national strategy to combat trafficking is still operational. It is a 2020-2025 strategy. We're currently working with UNDOC to put in place another strategy. The role of the Ministry of the Interior is to coordinate this national strategies. We have 6 pillars on prevention, care for victims, and investigation and prosecution of cases of trafficking in persons. On investigation and prosecution, the police and immigration authorities in Colombia are working together in order to address crime gangs and smuggling gangs, and working to address these crimes. We have Resolution 261 of 2022 in order to combat these criminal conducts. And we also have an agreement with the US Department of State, the Child Protection Compact, which focuses on child protection. Furthermore, we have put in place a protocol to identify and protect victims of child and labor exploitation, and this is pursuant to a decision made in 2021. We want to identify victims and trigger protection mechanisms. And through Law 23/2026 of 2023, we created the Pink Alert system in order to identify strategies to identify the disappeared, be they women, boys, or girls. Thank you.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you. And we have now come to an end to this section of our answers, Madam Chair. We remain available to answer further questions later.
Thank you, Your Excellency. You can now move on to response to the questions raised on Cluster 3, and if time permitting, you could take the balanced questions as well. Thank you. From the earlier clusters. You have the floor, sir.
Gracias, señora Presidenta.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'll give the floor to our representative from the Ministry of Agriculture, Elizabeth Montero, on food sovereignty.
Gracias, Su Excelencia.
Thank you very much, Your Excellencies, and a very good morning to Madam Chair and all members of the committee. We have the most ambitious land restructuring program. We have a real revolution for life in the country at the moment, which is our agrarian reform. We don't just want to implement the final peace agreement. We also want to implement all our commitments as a signatory state to the Covenant on Economic, Social and Cultural Rights. You asked us a question which is key for us, and that is having clear goals and a timetable, looking at the structural commitments that the final peace agreement made in terms of land redistribution. 7 million hectares under one category and 3 million hectares under another. Our aim is to ensure that at the end of this government, we will have allocated very many thousands of hectares that are part of the National Land Fund at the moment, which will have been granted through the conveyancing process, but also through a recovery of land program. And there'll be the possibility of including assets from drug trafficking and the mafia that are currently being granted to peasants that have the right to work the land. In Colombia, we've made historic progress on formalizing. We have 1.7 million hectares on rights recognition of ownership at the moment in Colombia. And our goal includes the possibility of establishing a rural and agrarian court system in Colombia. And we thank the committee for bringing this up. We want to ensure that we can bring about the rights of rural inhabitants in our country in this way. The national government has made specific efforts to ensure there is access to public information on the land reform policy. And this is now accessible for civil society, for the oversight mechanisms, and of course, information is available by international organizations. You'll be able to see what we're doing on agrarian reform and where the land comes from. So we want to close the urban-rural gap, and land redistribution is key to this. You've focused on it yourselves. We want to reduce multi-dimensional poverty index we are now 24.3 in 2024, a drop of almost 3 points, and this is a 3 percentage point drop, which is a real achievement for us, quite historic. We want to strengthen family and rural peasant resilience, and I can see that we can see that there is now. We have done something which has never been achieved before in recognizing these local territories. We have more than 1 million hectares that have been recognized as where the ownership of ethnic and indigenous communities have been recognized. And there are 14 peasant reservation areas now. And this is family smallholding territory, essentially. 14.1 million hectares, that is 12.3% of the national territory, are producing 70% of the food that our country consumes. And 2024 was declared as the year of family peasant agriculture. And we've put in place very important measures to strengthen it. This was done through Decision 016 of 2025 of the Ministry of Agriculture and Rural Development. And we focus on planning and implementation of this policy on 3 pillars. We want to look at resilient and fair and sustainable agricultural food production systems. We want a robust financing policy and managing agricultural risk, and measures for energy transition, tying in with the agrarian reform. We must say that we've made specific efforts to recover land in these areas, identifying areas for food production, which make it possible to properly implement the policies that we've put in place to try and bring about a progressive right to food. We have a specific policy on agro-environmental considerations, and this calls on national authorities and state authorities to put in place environmentally sensitive food production systems, looking at biodiversity conservation, amongst other things. We have an intersectoral food and nutritional security commission that is putting in place a nutritional policy in line with the human right to food. This is being led by the National Planning Service. And we have been pooling our efforts to ensure a regular, permanent, sustainable right to food, making sure there is a sufficient quality and that it's culturally sensitive as well. Let me just refer to some of the contributions, looking at agricultural's contribution to the Zero Hunger Initiative. We have record agricultural production, there's a significant increase, and in 2024, we've had 33.9 million tons of food produced, and I think we can see from this that many of our emblematic products cassava, fruit, rice, and of course coffee, amongst others, are some of our staple products. 5.6 billion tons was the figure for 2025, a significant increase from 2022. And we've seen record supply figures in Colombia, moving from 6.26 to 7.17 million tons this year. And something which is essential for the committee as well is the impact of these measures and the strengthening of agriculture and how it impacts food prices. We see that 25.5% on food prices, and in 2025 we've seen a 4.7% drop in food prices. And this means 20.86% is the figure for better food security and better access of Colombian citizens to food. This is a real achievement.
Thank you very much. I'd like to pass the floor again to Santiago Salinas now, please. Thank you, Your Excellency. So to contribute to the data concerning the patterns of hunger in the country, it's important to begin with the departure point that our colleague from the Agricultural Ministry stated. So this conversation around the comprehensive response to hunger and zero hunger through Decree 0684 of 2024, this is structured on 4 pillars that involve integrating all state agencies, and it involves a system relating to measures to combat smuggling in the past. And there are 4 avenues concerning economic transfer and direct finance transfers. 36 billion pesos has been invested in that in order to deal with and bolster finance transfers, which has represented a 24.2% increase year on year. In terms of the direct production of food, 33 million tons of food production represents the difference year on year as well. And the productive systems generally, as my colleague emphasized, have been increased. This also incorporates an additional strategy, which is a logistical system we've put in place to facilitate accessibility to food in remote areas. And the indicator we've chosen to emphasize this is the malnutrition and mortality rate in under 5s. And obviously, that involves significant effort for the state, which obviously reminds us that any policy that doesn't lead to zero hunger involves a historic debt that the society owes those people. Between 2024 and 2025, there was a drop from 10 to 8 points in the child mortality rate in relation to the regions most affected, Guajira, Choco, and Ivichada. And 48, 26 and points respectively were the data collected from those regions. This demonstrates, I think, the accelerated approach that the state has had to reducing malnutrition in the under 5s and the associated mortality. There's a 23-point average reduction, and this strategy is supported by a territorial rollout, which is equivalent to an investment of 26 billion in basic core food needs. This is bolstered by healthcare professionals, social workers, and food experts in the specific targeted areas. I would also say that in addition, we have a debt as a state concerning our surveys into the malnutrition situation, and this is a shortfall that the state needs to heal, and we've been making significant efforts to bolster our behavior in terms of data collection, which will allow us to better meet the right to proper food. And this, of course, will decrease the impact historically that these shortcomings have had. Thank you. No microphone for the head of delegation. Allow me to just add to some of that foregoing information, saying that the National Department for Planning had implemented a number of strategies seeking to reduce poverty, reduce inequalities, and improve well-being without exclusively depending on economic growth. This department headed up the drafting of a document concerning the national care system under the aegis of the National Council on Economic and Social Policy. Document 4143 was the key document, and it seeks to reduce the disproportionate burden of unremunerated work, particularly for female carers. One of the key focuses of this has been the bolstering of social welfare and universal coverage thereof through the design of a basic income threshold. We've worked on the consolidation of a scheme of monetary transfer, which will guarantee a reduction of vulnerabilities for households in extreme and moderate poverty without being dependent on the formal labour market. The National Development Plan also has promoted rural and alternative economies in the cultural and creative spheres as a mechanism to recognise and foster alternative cultural approaches to generate sources of income and sustainability and to dignify those working in the cultural and creative spheres. From an economic transfer perspective, we have fostered reforms prioritising the redistribution of resources and tax justice. The progressive tax reform, which was approved in 2022, includes the elimination of regressive tax benefits and the implementation of inheritance tax, which has been increased, and other taxes which will allow us to be more progressive. This was focused on the distribution of resources and universal social protection, the paradigm shift in the economic model, and environmental justice. One of the key progresses has been the consolidation of a comprehensive social protection system through the redesign of the program of monetary transfers and taxation. We have prioritized approaches such as a citizen's income, which allows for income for the most vulnerable households with a perspective of social justice and territorial equity. We've also sought to ensure that the key public services such as health, education, and housing all share a universal access perspective and a reduction in structural barriers preventing access through the fund to decrease poverty divides and territorial poverty divides is an example of this. I want to conclude by saying that the visit of the Special Rapporteur on the elimination of extreme poverty to Colombia last year was very timely. That was Mr. Olivier de Schutter, who's well known to you, and his report will be presented in the forthcoming Human Rights Council session halfway through this year. I'd like to pass the floor now to Madam Gloria Cuartas, who's going to continue to present answers to the questions raised under Cluster 3. I'll resume. We have 8 milestones we've had in place recently. They strengthen a decision made by the government to bring about a paradigm shift in our taxation system. And we've worked closely, particularly with women, female stakeholders in this regard across the entire government. There is a decision to work with the Gender Coordination Office of the government to bring in all government agencies. And together we have established a process called the Women's Implementation Board, which will allow us to bring in the gender perspective already incorporated in the peace agreement. That will ensure the state is guiding resources as best it can towards women, sexual minorities, and others in rural and urban areas. This process has been a very long road to walk, and we have serious challenges before us still pending. But the fact that we have a political decision and the political will to begin this exercise has already allowed us to garner support across all of the state agencies and locate this argument within the context of equality, ensuring that we can really focus on women with least opportunities. In terms of participation, the implementation unit tabled measures to ensure that women who are victims can participate in the specific Office for Peace negotiation, overcoming security barriers and also funding barriers in so doing. So we're very profoundly involving female victims in that exercise. And these policies, as I said at the outset, have also brought in rural farmers and fishers, and they have also worked hand in hand with the land redistribution program. We've been focusing on ensuring that our resource distribution doesn't simply limit itself to economic redistribution. We've also sought to really uproot the profound inequalities which originally fueled the conflict in so doing. Thank you very much, Madam Quartas. I'd like to pass the floor now to Dr. Rodriguez, Head of the Housing Ministry. Dr. Rodriguez. Distinguished committee members and civil society, the Change government has based its work on its new territorial paradigm through the National Development Plan to work with territorial agencies to guide local development on the basis of sustainability, risk management, cultural diversity, and climate change adaptation. Furthermore, through Decree 1470 of 2024, we've incorporated a comprehensive habitat focus, and we set up a new program to remove barriers to peace in order to ensure that we can foster rural communities' solution to housing infrastructure, urban design and cohabitation initiatives aimed at fostering social cohesion, redistribution and self-management of government. On the right to an adequate housing, we have fostered a range of solutions in this area which respond to the various characteristics in local areas of this problem in urban and rural areas. We have community participation, self-management and government with technical assistance and subsidies for that's in the rural areas. In the urban areas, we have other subsidies in place. There have been 4 decrees issued by the government which consolidate a normative framework incorporating the principles of adequate housing, including differentiated priorities benefiting the rural population and victims of the conflict. There have been 8.9 billion invested in total, and this demonstrates the commitment of President Petro's government. In 2024, as was said, according to the National Quality of Living Survey, the housing deficit stood at 3.9%, and 23.9% dropped down from 35%, and there were 60,000 homes which were under that deficit bracket. Now, the improvement which is significant, indicates that around 63,000 homes in rural areas were lifted out of that deficit band. We're also working to reduce the urban-rural divide. To do this and to step up compliance with the goals in the implementation framework, we've adopted a comprehensive focus combining normative, operational and funding strategies. We're currently designing roundtables in the territories, prioritizing certain target municipalities. And by way of example, we had a program launched in June of this year, which aims to produce results in December through roundtables, bringing in different departments and ensuring that financing is shared local and national level. We also have a program for particularly remote areas, and we've implemented differentiated programs which allow us to tailor our approach to the particular requirements of certain territories, including mechanisms such as royalties and specific taxation programs. In terms of water and sanitation, we've established a policy which ensures that in addition to infrastructure investment to improve the quality of water and reduce loss of water, we have programs to reduce the divide between rural and urban areas, strengthening rural providers with differentiated programs. Pursuant to Decree 736 of 2025, we regulate the minimum quantities that should be provided across households. The Colombian government has therefore recognized a vital minimum of 50 litres a day. And this bolsters the local government's ability to adopt similar programs. And also we have subsidies in isolated areas. We also have a municipality community program in both urban and rural areas that goes hand in hand with this. According to Decree 70 of 2025, we have a water and housing program which ensures the recognition of water as a shared commodity and ensures the democratization in communities to ensure access to sources and to protect them. In terms of coverage, with an increase of 1.1 percentage points since 2022, in 2024, 90% of the population does now have access to drinking water, and we will continue to work on this, obviously. We've invested 4.3 billion into this. This is an unprecedented investment into basic water and sanitation projects. Although, as we acknowledge, there is still an urban-rural gap, we had significant progress of 3.1 percentage points, going from a coverage of 60.9 to 64.3 in 2024. With 549,000 inhabitants in rural areas with first-time access to drinking water. And this was achieved through programs strengthening community actions through technical workshops and targeting subsidies to those in rural areas. I hope I've answered your questions.
Muchas gracias a la doctora Rodríguez.
Thank you very much, Dr. Rodriguez. I'd like to pass the floor to our advisor from the Minister of the Environment. Thank you very much, Your Excellency, distinguished committee members and civil society. The Colombian government, working through the Environmental and Sustainable Development Ministry, has undertaken significant efforts around tools to provide technical and normative improvements in the area of the environment and monitoring and oversight in terms of the use of water resources. In addition to that, we also have sought to raise awareness among water users concerning the importance of planning the use of water and promoting collective action to ensure the care for this essential resource for life. I want to emphasize some of the key progress we've achieved in this area. Firstly, we've progressed with our Law 1373 of 1997. This is particularly related to a preceding program. There's a 2018 program which was brought in as well with a corresponding decree and resolutions such as 1257 and 675. We have now a more robust framework which includes, among other things, the use of residual water for productive activities, thus reducing the pressure on our water tables. We've also had technical advice tables such as and guides such as the guide published in 2018 concerning the proper use of water. And these documents aim to bolster sustainable consumption models for water. These provide clear guides, we hope, for society in general and business and other users to have a proper guide concerning a more sustainable use of water. Thirdly, I want to emphasize Resolution 1256 of 2021, according to which the Minister of the Environment regulated the use of residual water supplies in the country. This is a significant progress, because it not only bolsters the efficient use of water, it also allows us to save natural resources under the model of a circular economy, contributing directly to transformation towards more sustainable development. This progress, it demonstrates the commitment of the national government and the Ministry of the Environment to guarantee equitable, safe and sustainable access to water. connecting normative, technical and participatory management with the needs of a country which needs to protect its resources for both present and future generations. Thank you very much.
Castellanos.
Thank you very much, Mr. Castellanos. And I want to refer now to ruling 302 of 2027, which declared some actions of the state unconstitutional in relation to children in La Guajira. This was pursuant to a reference made in the previous session. This is a priority under public policy in terms of a rights-based approach for the national government. The government established a specific monitoring and oversight mechanism for public policies pursuant to Decree 737 of 2024. With the leadership of the President's Office, this mechanism brings together competent national agencies and local agencies. The oversight bodies and civil society organizations now have a protocol to guide implementation, ensuring the participation of the Guayu indigenous people. On the basis of this, pursuant to the mechanisms we have, we organized our response to these situations in 4 different regions, and the planning and follow-up and implementation was based on this. This combines in its design specialized technical boards as well as decision-making spaces and follow-up tools to optimize joined-up actions across these various territories. And this combination is anchored into instruments. One is the Provisional Action Plan, which began in 2023 and continues to be implemented with verifiable goals. And secondly, the Structural Plan, which is in the pipeline and guided to ensure sustainability and consolidation of local capacity building. In compliance with this ruling, 362 of 2017, this is one of the key priorities of the national government in terms of meeting its obligations to children's rights. I'd like to pass the floor in the little time remaining for this segment, Chair, to Madam Castellanos to talk about extraction projects and our response to that.
Respecto a la cuestión.
With regards to prevention measures undertaken, and the question put by the committee member, Madam Rossi, we have adopted specific measures in environmental rights to regulate mining and energy projects which might affect equitable, safe access to water, also ensuring effective participation of the communities which might potentially be impacted. Firstly, environmental dismissal processes, licensing processes rather, incorporate environmental assessment, which will allow us to assess possible impact on both surface and subterranean water tables. This incorporates measures of water resource quantities available and also community involvement. We apply the precautionary principle in this, requiring the adoption of measures for management, prevention, mitigation, correction and compensation in the face of any significant risks identified. In line with Decree 1070 of 2023, which regulates provisions concerning project licensing and impact assessment, it requires that any projects which might lead to impacts on environmental resources have prior environmental licensing. This decree requires environmental impact studies to be in place beforehand. Finally, we've been bolstering technical and normative tools which will allow us to mitigate cumulative impact on ecosystems and communities. This also contributes to a more comprehensive and preventive management of water impact in the sphere of licensing, in line with the principles and guidelines enshrined in Decree 1076 of 2015. Thank you. If you'd allow, Your Excellency, I just want to add on ruling 702 concerning water use in La Guajira, we have a plan in place which not only allows for the construction of infrastructure, but also social and community support to ensure that communities are able to be fully participatorily involved in the process. We invested 309 million in this in a number of different interventions. We have 141 interventions which are benefiting 135,000 across a number of indigenous communities. We also have had 30 interventions currently in the pipeline, which we think will benefit around 500,000 people in La Guajira in the near future. Okay, thank you, Chair. I also want to provide an answer on physical and mental health, but there isn't any time left in this segment. We see the time's run out, and maybe we can come back to it later. Otherwise, we'll submit that in writing. So back to you, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Your Excellency. You can certainly come back to it, because if we manage time, we should be able to find time for that response. And in fact, it'll help you when you hear the follow-up questions now. You could do it together with the follow-up questions. The floor is now open for follow-up questions, and I recognize Ms. Rossi, Mr. Fiorio. While others, Ms. Perez. So at the moment, Ms. Rossi, could you kindly pose question? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chairperson, for the floor, and once again, greetings to the Colombian delegation and indeed to civil society organizations present here with us in the room. I'm grateful for all of the information you provided to date, which is extremely useful for the dialogue indeed. I have a number of follow-up questions to put to you. One is very brief, and we've heard information concerning poverty and progress made recently. I'd like to know whether or not you have information concerning specifically child poverty, disaggregated as well by the various different factors that we've discussed. In terms of the right to mental health as well, I wonder if you could provide information concerning the implementation of the National Mental Health Policy, which we referred to before, and challenges in terms of coverage, human resources, local implementation, and differentiated strategies according to gender, age, disability, and so forth. Could you also tell us about measures you've adopted to confront high rates of mental health problems in indigenous rural communities, as well as communities of African descent, and particularly with regards to suicide? We've seen there's a lot of high rates of suicide in zones particularly affected by the armed conflict. Could you tell us about this? Could you also tell us about updated information concerning the institutionalization of persons with disabilities, both in private and public establishments, in particular children with disabilities? And what strategies have you adopted to progressively move those individuals out of institutionalization, particularly those with psychosocial or intellectual disabilities and people in the autistic spectrum, and for the broadening out of community services for them? I also have a question on women deprived of freedom, detainees, inmates. Could you tell us about measures you've adopted to ensure the right to sexual and reproductive health for those people, and also the right to access to clean drinking water? On drugs policy, as we heard yesterday, and we're delighted to hear that this policy is drawing from the universal human rights system. What I'd like to know is whether or not you've planned to establish a national framework to institutionalize the progressive and sustained implementation of harm reduction services in the long term throughout the entire country, and above all, guaranteeing public funding for that. Although you say that public investment in harm reduction policies tripled, the information we are aware of suggests that there's insufficient funding of the 2023-2033 drugs reduction program, and for harm reduction in particular. So if you could tell us about that, we'd be grateful. And finally, could you tell us about any measures you're adopting to protect, ensure, and promote the recovery, sowing, and commercialization of indigenous seeds, There's a Constitutional Court ruling which dates back to 2023 on this, recognising the court the presence of genetic pollution in crops in indigenous territories and the adverse impact in terms of these genes being spread across those crops in the country. So we'd be delighted to know what your response to that particularly relevant ruling is in terms of the right to food in the country. Thank you. I'll leave it at that.
Thank you, Ms. Rossi. Mr. Fiorio, you have the floor, please.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you very much. I do understand that the questions in this section are focused on specific issues of the covenant. And I'm aware of a very serious, urgent situation, something that happened yesterday morning in Colombia. The paramilitary group known as the Paramilitary Defense Group issued a threat against a feminist organization, Sigma Mujer, and did this because of the work they're doing to defend human rights defenders, to combat gender violence and sexual violence in the context of the conflict. And they were threatened in the region of Monte Maria because of their work. Amongst other things, in their release, it is said that it's time to bring about order and to clean things up. And it says that this should not be in line with the AGC. So I wonder whether the state has already acted in relation to this clear, imminent threat, and what measures has the state taken to save the life, the integrity, the work of the members of this specific NGO, but also of the other NGOs that are working to defend human rights. We have seen this threat now in the Monte Maria region by this paramilitary organization. I'm also thinking about the human rights defenders framework. Can the delegation please indicate any other structural actions they're taking to prevent and sanction attacks against women, particularly in the context of armed conflict? The delegation also referred to multidimensional poverty reduction strategies. So in this respect, could the delegation tell us which indicators are essentially used to assess this multi-dimensional poverty, and whether these are in line with the UN standards for the same phenomenon, and what is being done in terms of public policies? And furthermore, in answer to the list of questions, the state said that there are 292,000 actions for safeguarding in 2013, and this was under question 2 that I addressed yesterday. Now, of these, 75% of these court orders are to ensure access to health. So in relation to this, could the delegation tell us whether these are equivalent to amparo actions, and whether, bearing in mind the very high number of such actions in the healthcare sections, could you indicate what the reason is for this high number of appeals? And what else needs to be done to ensure access to justice? In which cases what do the people have to do to ask for these guarantees? And I would also like to ask whether the delegation has any information on the number of cases where emergency measures were granted, or whether these amparo actions have actually resulted in the provision of health services. Thank you.
Mr. Fiorio, we are running out of time. So I'll request Ms. Perez and Mr. Winford to kindly be brief. I'm sorry, Mr. Winford, you always end up compromising. But Ms. Perez, you have the floor.
Muchas gracias, señora Presidenta.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, and a very good morning to all members of the delegation, civil society representatives and others. Now, the national care system, first of all, we welcome there's been legislative progress in relation to this system, and particularly the recognition of care as a fundamental right. Now, in relation to the information that you sent for us, I wonder whether there's any updated data on the following issues. Do you have a register of parental leave in recent? I know that you had a time use questionnaire in 2021, and we commend you for this, but we can see a real gap when it comes to unpaid caring work done by women. And in fact, women spend more than twice as much time doing this than men. We hope that there will be such a questionnaire or investigative research carried out regularly so that there can be a proper impact on the care system. And I wonder whether there is any more information on the use of parental leave. And how have you included the inclusion of persons with disabilities in putting in place this care system? My third question is whether you have an estimate of the budgetary resources that are already allocated to the system. Moving on to a different issue, we know that there's been recent activities to fumigate drug crops with a highly harmful substance. To what extent will this affect the crop substitution program that had been put in place to address this problem? Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Perez. Mr. Winfer.
Yeah, and I will try to speed up. 3 short questions. The first relates to the right to food, and thanks for the information you have already presented to us, very valuable. I at least heard that around your decree 684 from June 2024, there's also discussions that it has been adopted without proper consultation of all the relevant groups. Maybe you can give us an update. How do you want to make sure that those who are really maybe particularly affected by these, the decree and the regulation can be done, or let's say take into consideration all the relevant social groups? My second question is about business and human rights. How far ahead do you have come with the binding regulation for business and human rights, and how difficult, or where the difficulties maybe in regulating investments and investment regulations around business investments in your country, particularly also in raw materials and minerals? And the last point is I listened carefully to what you have explained yesterday already on climate adaptation and the strong effect of your president to work on these issues. I would like to get maybe a rough idea, what are the core issues you see where you have to respond, and where maybe climate change is progressing so fast that you need additional support internationally or regionally, yeah, and maybe also financially. That would be interesting for us to know. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Mr. Winfer. Your Excellency, the floor is now with you and the delegation, 20 minutes to respond to the questions. And maybe if there's time, then you can also respond to the previous ones. You have the floor.
Gracias, señora Presidenta.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Well, there were many questions asked by Ms. Rossi on health. So we can provide the answers we've pre-prepared on this. When it comes to accessibility, quality of health, we've made historic investment into infrastructure, including hospitals, looking particularly at hospitals in rural and remote areas. We also had a decree of putting in place an intercultural indigenous health system called CESCR. On financing for 2024, the health budget was increased by 12.9% compared to the previous year. And we've begun to put in place measures to improve transparency and traceability of financing in the system. And we now have a comprehensive finance and assistance system, CEFA. In the short term, we therefore hope to be able to trace every single peso within the system. The system ensures that each payment can be connected to the corresponding health expenditure. On the structural reform of the health system, we want to guide and make transparent resources in the system, ensuring that it's allocated on the basis of the territory's health needs. We want to make sure that there's primary health care, and we have a system called CAPS, and it should work as an open door system with no discrimination, and that is able to effectively meet the needs of the population. This would put an end to financial intermediaries where the health service providers receive all of the funds. This has led to real inequalities in health in terms of income, on the grounds of income and where the services are being sought for. We have an integrated healthcare system. We want to have decent, fair conditions for workers. We want health sovereignty and strengthen governance and citizens' participation in health services. In September 2024, we approved the first debate. In November 24, the second debate was held in March 25. At the moment, these measures are before the Senate and the CEF Commission, and the third debate is being awaited, and we hope that further developments will occur next week. This health reform is one of the most controversial issues in the country because it directly affects a health provision services, which is more looking at gain than services. And the government has been focusing its time and attention to make a change to this situation. It hasn't been a very good business for any of the investors, in fact, because many of them went bust during the exercise. The constitutional reform, which was approved in December 2024 by means of a legislative act, it means that as of 2026, in a bid for territorial independence, we will increase finance transfers to local authorities. In the health sector, we want to ensure that health provision is provided at the load level, and we want to look at the social determinants of health. So this law will be an important addition to the bill proposing reform to the system. At the moment, there is a public discussion of the initial draft. As part of the implementation of the Rural Health Plan and to comply with the commitments of the final peace agreement, we've made significant progress to close gaps in terms of access to health in the rural world. The main results are the following. We see that we have now more than 3,000 local health teams in more than 300 local authorities. 1.3 million pesos have been invested in this area. We have more than 9,000 pesos for youth health teams in many different districts. We've also financed 608 infrastructure projects in 181 local authorities. 1.38 million pesos were invested here. 522 transport projects in 294 local authorities. The investment here was more than 600,000 pesos. And 9,500 million pesos to build local services in many local authorities in the latter half of 24 and the beginning of 25. There's a program for migrants, ensuring that also there is access for trans and non-binary persons, We also have policies on drugs, on the use of glyphosate and other areas, and we'll submit these in writing. The glyphosate issue, and there was a public statement from a president in a specific context due to difficulties in maintaining public order in a specific area of the region. I now give the floor to the representative of the Ministry of Agriculture, particularly looking at the question of seeds. Thank you, Your Excellencies. And I seize this opportunity to specifically mention the follow-up question asked about the human right to food. And I also want to refer to the issue of the drug policy, which brings about a change in paradigm to combating drug trafficking in our country. Now, on the issue of seeds, we are working within the agricultural sector on robust legislation that can look at the whole program relating to seeds, including traditional seeds. We want to look at the structural elements of this regulation. We want to strengthen local systems, the production and protection of seeds at the local level, ensuring that farm workers and peasants can provide this kind of seed, also ensuring the integrity of food sovereignty and communities' independence. The Constitutional Court believes it's a fundamental principle to have coexistence, so we can have regulation, putting in place a system which allows for an interaction between native seeds and commercial seeds, thereby ensuring the protection of traditional systems. On the human right to food, we must clarify that we have used public policy and resolutions, which is a government prerogative, and we have a resolution particularly relating to agro-environmental policies. This is Resolution 331 of 2024. This means that this issue is a key one. We want citizens' participation and to take the debate further amongst the general population. We're working on the human right to adequate food. We have a draft statutory law, which as part of its guiding principles includes intercultural dimensions and a territorial dimension of the human right to food. When it comes to the hierarchy of laws, the process for statutory law is one of the most rigorous if we want to put in place a rule of this kind, because it relates to the regulation of a fundamental law. So it lies at the very heart of our constitution. And the public debate is one which involves not just the legislature, but also civil society and with participants from rural communities, and that will be essential if we want to end up with a law, and the current bill is before the Ministry for Equality. Now, the ambassador has clearly delineated our policy on the use of glyphosates as part of our drug policy. It's important to recognize that we are making progress using measures that allow us to implement a regulatory framework of alternative uses to the coca leaf. The Ministry of Justice and the Ministry of Agriculture and of Health are working on a draft decree which grants authorizations for seeds, crops, and the use of pre-existing plantations of coca leaf for medical, scientific, and industrial uses. So scientific use is something that is lacking in Colombia. We want a sufficient scientific basis on alternative uses of the coca leaf, which will allow us to find these alternative uses in industry, in medicine and in the food system as well. There will be a very clear control and traceability, which will allow for registration, which is the National Drugs Council. The committee also expressed a specific concern because this kind of coca leaf regulation guarantee the participation and the benefit of rural communities and respects these traditional practices. And in answer to this, we can tell you that the participation in this kind of activity with medicine or science or industry, well, we will have to have compulsory participation of ethnic and peasant communities. This will be the case in any local authority that has this kind of production. Their participation will be ensured throughout the value chain, and we will have fair distribution of any profits. And there will be respect of the ancestral traditions of ethnic communities. And we have robust constitutional protection for this. We also have ILO Convention 169, and we have the implementation of the case law from our Constitutional Court. Obviously, we have to have respect of free, prior, informed consultation of ethnic communities where appropriate. Thank you. On the issue of drugs, we have to say that in addition to the efforts made by the national government, we're also globally promoting a substantive change to drug policy, which is based on human rights. And we have been working in Vienna, where we managed to bring about a study group on drug policy in order to revise and review what's been done thus far. And this is also a debate in the Human Rights Council. This issue is very important, and this is an opportunity to point to the very important work that's being done on a general observation on unfair discrimination and exclusion of ethnic and indigenous communities. Their rights have been violated. Obviously, there is responsibility on the part of the Colombian state, but if the coca leaf is included in list 1 of the 1961 drugs convention, by doing this, there was criminalization and stigmatization of indigenous people and peasants from the Andean region. Colombia has also supported the request submitted by Bolivia for there be a revision and reclassification of the coca leaf within the 1961 convention. This is one of the reasons why we have great expectation of the general observation announced by the committee in 2022 on the impact of drug policy on human rights. We're convinced that these policies must be applied entirely in line and with absolute respect of the human rights, which obviously includes economic, social, and cultural rights too. Now, there was also a question about threats that have been made against the Cisma Mujer organization by the group mentioned by Mr. Fiorio. On this point, I wanted to give the floor to our representative from the Ministry of the Interior, but the name of this group is self-selected by the group, and it has a very serious impact on the right to truth and to memory and to dignity for the victims of human rights violations in Colombia. Gaitan was a popular leader in Colombia, and he was murdered in 1968. Now, this group is generally known as Tan del Golfo, and they have taken the name of this leader who, in fact, represents quite the reverse of what this group is doing. So we choose not to use this name that they've taken on for themselves, which offends the dignity of the victims and of members of their families. And I now give the floor to my colleague on my left. Thank you very much, Ambassador. Our thanks to Mr. Fiorio for having mentioned this threat that's been addressed to all organizations, social, political, all NGOs working in the Monte de Marias region. We absolutely reject this act. This government has recognized that women defenders have a differentiated impact because of their work, and we are building the local components of our comprehensive protection program for women defenders and leaders. As part of this program, from the CESCR organization has been an important ally, and at different moments we've also had an opportunity to emphasize their contribution to in terms of access to violence for women victims of violence. So yesterday we became aware of this threatening pamphlet. We immediately referred it to the authorities, to the Ministry of Defense, and to the Office of the Peace Commissioner. There was an immediate communication to the CESCR Mujer organization and other organizations in the Monte de Maria region. Thank you.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you. On the issue of women's rights in prisons and equality issues there, I'd like to give the floor to Ministry of Equality. But let me tell you before that the government promoted and obtained the promulgation of a law granting special treatment outside prison for women deprived of liberty. So this is a robust policy and quite new within the penal system to protect the rights of women. So, Ministry of Equality, you have the floor.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you, Your Excellency. It is true to say that in 2023, we had Law 2292, a public interest law, which does include provisions for women who've committed crimes when marginalized. It allows them to serve their sentences outside prison if they carry out activities in the public interest that have community or social benefits for no less than 20 hours. So there is a recognition here of differentiated treatment within the criminal justice system for women, and this goes hand in hand with policies being made to bring about more humanized policies as part of the Compass document in 2025. 4.45 million pesos are now committed to being invested over a 10-year period through more 109 activities, ensuring that persons deprived of liberty will have better access to their rights. So there are now alternatives to deprivation of liberty through transitory authorities, for example. So we have been adapting infrastructure and overseeing prisoner oversight systems, and the Ministry of Justice is putting in place a protocol to provide proper care and transfer persons that are deprived of liberty if they need this. There is a particular emphasis on women's health here with guarantee protocols for sexual and reproductive health rights for the prison authorities to abide by. Thank you.
En relación con el tema de los índices.
On the indices used to calculate, or rather the indicators to calculate the multi-dimensional poverty indexes, I'll give the floor to the relevant colleague. Now, we had a question from Ms. Rossi in this regard. I can tell you that we have two ways of measuring poverty. We have monetary poverty and multidimensional poverty in Colombia. The first compares income per capita in the home calculated against a common basket. Now, if anyone does not reach a particular threshold, then they are classified as living in poverty. If there is no access to basic foodstuffs at all, then they are classified as living in extreme poverty. Now, multidimensional poverty gives as a category has a much broader view, taking into account 5 dimensions and 15 indicators: education, health, employment, children's situation, and housing, amongst others. And an individual is considered as living in multi-dimensional poverty when they experience deprivation in at least a third of these indicators. The Statistical Administration Unit uses research and questionnaires, including a household questionnaire. And that is the authority that produces and then disseminates these official figures. And they are figures that are then used to guide public policy. And it allows us to identify areas where there has been progress and where there is a shortfall in the service guarantees.
Well, we have, I think, come to an end of the time allowed, Chairperson, and we'll submit any pending answers in writing unless we can deal with them further down the line today. Tax issues, disability issues, enterprise and human rights, and trafficking in persons are included in them. But allow me a few seconds to refer to a specific question put by one of the committee members, Mr. Fiorio, on constitutional protection and whether or not it's equivalent to amparo, this tutela. So I want to answer the following. Colombia had a huge overhaul in the amparo process while other countries in the region insisted on amparo as a key institution for the protection of human rights. Colombia turned its back on that until 1991, when a constitutional change, which was very important, came in. And this was the expression of the peace agreement at the time. It was incomplete and insufficient, but significant. And it introduced, as an amparo appeal, what's called tutela in Colombia. This tutela was a very important demand by human rights organizations, and we managed to get that into the 1991 constitution. It did have significant resistance from large swathes of the population, and this began to be used regularly, but it was also mocked, and scandals were generated just because it was being used, but it was protecting the constitutional rights of people. And so we had thousands of cases brought and initially initiated, then there was 1 million. It escalated year on year, and this demonstrated the lack of satisfaction and the shortcomings in the justice system in our institutions. Now, tutela is a solid and robust mechanism, which is undeniably important, and it protects the rights of our citizens. And Colombia is trying to bring around that the core justice needs of the population in the sphere of human rights. There was a specific question concerning the high use of tutela as regards health, and I'm happy to submit specific answers on that in writing. But basically, the underlying cause was fairly clear. It wasn't really a problem in terms of health provision, in terms of the system that was being changed, but there was a more holistic weakness there, and at the time, tutela was being used a great deal, and so it became a significant resource in order to ensure people had access to their care needs. But I'm happy to explain the dynamic there in writing further down the line. Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you, Your Excellency. We will now request questions from Cluster 4, and I request my colleague, Ms. Laura Crachenio-Tatu, to please pose her questions under Cluster 4. You have the floor, Madam.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And also welcome, although it is the second day, warm welcome to the delegation of, distinguished delegation of Colombia from my side. On Cluster 4, it is my duty to raise questions under Article 13 and 14, which relate to the right to education, and also under Article 15, the right to take part in cultural life and to enjoy the benefits of scientific progress, And I will have 7 points under the right to education and 2 points under the right to take part in cultural life. Starting with the right to education, my first point refers to report, OECD report from 2024, which indicates persisting challenges in the field of education. In 2020, Colombia has become a member of the OECD, which also results in more reliable data being provided in respect of many of the socioeconomic indicators, which are relevant for the implementation of many of the rights enshrined in our covenant. As regards to the right to education, this data show that despite progress made, several concerns remain. Thus, the report from 2024 indicates that as a remaining challenges in the field of education, the quality of education. So although access to education has increased over the last decade, the education outcome remains poor and strongly influenced by the socioeconomic backgrounds. Secondly, the inequality in educational outcomes. There is a significant regional disparity in the enjoyment, in the enrollment, and also in school outcome. The widening of educational gaps, which are impacting in a disproportionate way students from disadvantaged backgrounds. Then the PISA results from 2022 indicate a decline in mathematics, science, and reading when compared with the previous years. The report also indicates high school dropout rates in secondary education, so only 44 out of 100 children complete high school on time. The quality of teaching and the teacher professional development and also access to high quality and affordable early childhood education are difficult issues, still difficult issues. So my questions here are, how is your government planning to address these challenges indicated by the OECD report of 2024? Namely the challenges regarding the quality of education, the inequality in the educational outcomes, the gaps impacting students from disadvantaged backgrounds, the PISA results, the high school dropout rates, the high school dropout rates, in particular in secondary education, the quality of teaching and the need for high quality and affordable early childhood education. My second point refers to the gap between the rural and the urban areas in the implementation of the right to education. And in your replies to our list of issues, you indicate that your government has adopted a Plan Especial de Educación Rural that runs until 2031, and that this plan has several indicators, but the reply is not complemented by data to show how this plan was implemented so far and how it has contributed to the reducing the gap between urban and rural areas in respect to access to education, educational attainment, education quality, reducing the dropout rates, or other relevant aspects which our committee indicated in our list of issues. So would it be possible to provide information on the concrete results, effects of this plan, and on how the measures envisaged in the plan have contributed to the reducement of the gap regarding access to education, quality education, education attainment, thus contributing to the reduction of the gap between children from rural and respectively urban areas. Thirdly, my third point refers to some recommendations which the Ministry of Education in Colombia has received from El Defensor del Pueblo. In 2024, in its report to the Congress, which covered the year 2023, a report which is publicly available on the website of the institution, El Defensor del Pueblo has made several concrete recommendations to the Ministry of National Education regarding the implementation of the right to education. And I will not quote all these recommendations, but there are quite a few. So, for example, strengthen guidelines on access, availability, permanence, and relevance of the right to education in rural areas of departments such as Chocó, Vopes, Sucre, Nariño, and Guaviare, or improve strategies for the strengthening the cultural identity in rural schools and ethnic educational space, or ensure and guarantee the right to education in terms of accessibility, affordability, adaptability, acceptability by allocating resources for the sector through legal and constitutional mechanisms. And here I have a more general question and one more specific. What is the value of the El Defensor del Pueblo recommendation in your legal system? Are these recommendations generally followed by the institutions concerned? And how do you give effect to such recommendation if that is the case? And the specific questions will relate to if it would be possible, in case this happened, to provide information on action taken or implementation measures adopted to give effect to the recommendation which come from this report of El Defensor del Pueblo, recommendations which were addressed to the Ministry of Education. Fourth point, right to education of displaced students. The coverage of displaced students by the educational system has improved recently, especially in primary schools. And your country adopted a law, Victims and Land Restitution Law, in 2011, which recognized the right of victims of the armed conflict to access education as a key measure of reparation. And this law also mandates the state to adopt special programs that promote access and continuity in the education system. However, according to reports received, the implementation of this law has been limited. Only 40% of displaced students have reportedly benefited from these programs and challenges. And several challenges remaining, like the outreach, the financial sustainability, or the need to adapt academic pathways to the need of displaced population. So my question here is, what measures are envisaged to further implement the Victims and Land Restitution Law from 2011 in order to improve or expand the outreach of this law to ensure its financial sustainability and adapt the academic paths to the needs of displaced population? Fifth, the right to education of foreign migrant children and adolescents. I think this is also relevant in the context in which Colombia is a country that receives an impressive number of migrants, many of them being children, and several reports indicate that despite progress made in the last year, foreign migrant children and adolescents still face persistent gaps in school enrollment. Due to limited seat availability, insufficient transportation services, and lack of documentation. And if it is possible to provide data on the number of foreign migrant students and adolescents in your country, their country of origin, how many of these children are currently enrolled in the Colombian school, at what levels, and how do you address the challenges that they face? Finally, on the right to education, maybe just to reiterate that in respect of some of the questions that we were posed in our list of questions, there were only general replies and insufficient data provided. So if you also have complementary data in respect of the pertinence and the quality of secondary education in order to prevent dropout rates and concrete results of this measure, this will be welcome. And also in respect of measures taken to and resources allocated to improve distance learning. In the context of the ongoing internal armed conflict, especially in certain areas of the country, such as Chocó, Nariño, Cauca, to name just a few, school infrastructure was affected by armed groups fighting against each other, and school attendance has become problematic due to security issues, both within school facilities and on children's way to school. What measures are in place to address the safety of children and their way to school and to protect school infrastructure from being misused by different armed groups? And to conclude, because I see that my time is up, under Article 15, the committee will be interested to know some implementation and concrete results regarding el Plan Decenal de Lenguas Nativas, el Plan Nacional de Desarrollo de Lenguas Nativas, and Protocolo de Mediación Lingüístico con el Pueblo MCAC, which you mentioned in your reply, but there are no concrete results mentioned in respect of their implementation. And finally, if you have updated information on access to internet and internet coverage, especially in the rural areas. Thank you very much, and I apologize for my overpassing a bit the time. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Ms. Krasnitatu, Your Excellency. You have 30 minutes to respond. Thank you.
Gracias, señora Presidente. Primero,
thank you very much, Chair. And I'd like, first of all, to pass the floor to our delegate from the Ministry of Culture, Mr. Castiblanco, and then we will maybe add to information concerning the context on educational rights. So maybe some delegates would like to come in fact, concerning the specific questions that have been put. So please flag that to me if you'd like. Go ahead, please, Doctor. A very good morning, and thank you very much, Chair, for the questions, and greetings to the support team. We also greet the organisation supporting the drafting of these questions and are supporting us in the territory, as well as the teams that have allowed us to contribute these contributions. The first thing I want to say from the point of view of my ministry is that we do recognise very clearly in the National Development Plan that we are a plurinational state. And this is a very significant position in terms of driving policy creation, particularly. We'd like to also clearly establish that our position is one that is founded on intercultural dimensions, recognise these on a horizontal basis. This is fundamental for balancing power across the territories, and our role doubtlessly has a lot to do with this cultural transformation, which allows a paradigm shift for culture, art and knowledge. And this paradigm shift I'd like to share with you today for you to support us as a committee in this process to establish a biocultural perspective on the basis of ruling 622. The cultural rights of rivers have been recognized, for example, and this speaks to a vision far beyond an anthropocentric perspective, a completely different paradigm, and the knowledge systems of indigenous people who are having an unprecedented impact on our national policy as I speak to you today. We also hope you can support with our creation of spaces of culture in spaces which focus on humanitarian protection, not as simple support, but to really foster our approach and bolster communities at times of crisis, among others. And this is where we really want to draw on international support. We'd like to take the opportunity as well to go into more depth concerning the creation of a culture of peace. We're making significant effort today to widen out the implementation of the Truth and Reconciliation Committee's recommendations. This is through a process of destigmatizing victims in the country and combating polarization procedures or threats, which one of the rapporteurs already touched on, mentioning some of the threats you spoke about. We profoundly reject what happened with the CESCR Corporation in so doing, and we stand in solidarity with all of those who are currently being victimized by some of the processes across the territory. We have a fundamental point here, and that is to understand culture as sustaining life. It's not possible to advance with development policies without this broader conceptualization. And to do this, I think it's very important to share with you one of the key programs the national government has been taking forwards, and this is ensuring that in schools, so this is connected to the education question, the right of children to culture is guaranteed with an investment of more than 184,000 pesos, more than 1,000 artists and other contributors have been brought into schools to participate in the educational system, and this wasn't the case before. This is also an invitation in forthcoming follow-up, if you could help us to bolster the focus on artists and other cultural flag bearers, to bolster the protection of heritage across the country. Also through this strategy, we have more than 500 artistic and cultural organizations we've brought in, and we've reached more than 380,000 children, including indigenous children, those of African descent, Palenquero and Roma children. And this includes vulnerable territories, remote territories, and those that are most affected by conflict. This is one of the most ambitious projects in the cultural sector. In terms of indigenous languages, which was a key question, the national decade for indigenous languages has an investment of over 70 billion pesos and is now touching more than 40 indigenous peoples to bolster indigenous languages across the country, and this is being done with a view to protecting their knowledge systems and also their spiritual practices. This is absolutely key as well, so that we can understand the role played by culture at the heart of country policy. In terms of this National Indigenous Languages Decade, it's important also to emphasize that we understand that we must continue to work with more than 34 indigenous peoples who are facing imminent extinction. The Raizales people, the Palenqueros, and the very important role also played by the Roma people in the National Culture Plan are essential here. These efforts are all conflated in a public document called 15-Year Public Policy Plan, which has 3 indigenous chapters which are based on prior consultation with indigenous peoples in particular, and establishes a 15-year roadmap so that we can go beyond the mandate of the current government dealing with these issues today. In that vein, I want to also highlight the work being done by the state to ensure recognition of victims of the patriotic union and the so-called false positive victims, so that we are ensuring that for the first time a government is directly working on the recognition of political and social rights from a cultural perspective and in terms of a memory construction perspective, as was highlighted by my colleague in the previous session. You didn't ask about this, but we'd also like to mention that we've been implementing binding actions around heritage protection, in particular responding to demonstrations by indigenous people. This it represents investments of around 112 billion pesos. This relates in part to food heritage and cooking, which is key to food security and the construction of rural and farming cultural practice protection, which is fundamental. And all of this is done bringing in participation by citizens through the mixed rural participation boards that we've set up. Another key thing we believe to be vital that I want to mention is related to the use of coca leaf. As His Excellency mentioned before, the Colombian state is inviting support, including from you, to allow us to reframe the position of coca leaf within the 1961 Convention paradigm to carry out a destigmatization process, reversing stigmatization falling disproportionately on ethnic indigenous people. We've also got a safeguard process in place, and this includes the use of coca leaf and a recognition of knowledge systems on its list of good practices under the 2003 UNESCO Convention. I also want to conclude that it isn't possible to construct a culture of peace without understanding that we must stand in solidarity with what the Palestine people are experiencing today, and we will be working under our 2025 presidential decree, which organizes all agencies to work to do so. Thank you.
Muchas gracias, Dr. Castillo.
Thank you very much, Doctor. And as I mentioned before, I want to add a few details on the context. I hope we've answered, and it will answer the questions put. I'd also like to pass the floor to two members of the delegation. Colombia recognizes education as a key fundamental right to recognize equal opportunity through democracy and permit access to other rights. This government of change has dealt with this right with a perspective which runs from the early years through to third years or senior education. This applies to historically excluded people, indigenous people, remote peoples, victims of conflict, and young people who are not studying or working. This seeks not only to ensure access to education, but it also strengthens shared responsibility between family, society, and the state, as established by the Constitution in its Article 67. In the early years, we've broadened early years educational coverage from 1,900,000 people, young boys and girls, to 2,600,000 boys and girls, with the establishment of new schools, training of teachers, and other investment. This strategy includes a differentiated, tailored focus, such as ambulatory education, targeted as well to indigenous peoples, and so it ensures children grow in fostering environments, ensuring their integration from the early years. In terms of primary education and middle years education, over 200 schools have been opened up in remote areas. We've had more than 5,000 new students matriculated and trained a large number of staff, and this in part is to combat in context of violence. Technical and vocational agriculture and fishing education has all been bolstered hand in hand with our agrarian and rural reform, and particularly targeting historically marginalized communities. Our teacher training has been absolutely key to this, ensuring proper salaries and recognizing territorial differences, accumulated experience, and the difficulties of teaching in particularly difficult contexts. More than 80,000 teachers have had increased in salaries, strengthening their leadership as agents of social transformation and peace builders in their communities. In parallel, we've implemented the comprehensive IT and teacher support program. We've established 8,000 new centres, and this has benefited more than 87,000 students. This strategy brings in art, culture, sport, sciences, technology, citizens education, and socio-emotional education, with the support of more than 1,900 practitioners in rural areas. The support system and special needs system has been a system which has broadened out the classic curriculum and extended school days in a number of different ways. In terms of science and technology, we have constructed more than 8,000 educational systems. This has had a knock-on effect benefiting more than 80,000 people. We have 27,000 technological teams to come in and bolster technology available in classrooms and libraries. We've also had infrastructure development across the board in our schools, and this has represented a 79% quadrennial improvement. We've also got a school food program, which has improved its coverage from 63% to 89%. And we've implemented a school meals program during school holidays. This is taken together. This has improved food support, food sustainability. We've focused on communities of African descent and indigenous peoples, consolidating community and school life. In terms of higher education, we have innovative programs that we've rolled out, such as the PTIS, have connected middle years education to high school, ensuring technical training and specialization towards university programs, eliminating traditional barriers to access. Free education policy called I Can Study has benefited more than 900,000 students, and we also have 27 targeted programs with investments of 41 million pesos, ensuring equity and territorial coverage is improved. Colombia has also been a pioneer in Latin America with the implementation of an indigenously owned education system, recognizing the perspective and knowledge of indigenous peoples and ensuring the education there represents their cultural identity and integrity. Finally, the state has designed its comprehensive risk and emergency management system in schools to ensure the right to education is protected in the face of natural, social, and conflict-based crisis, ensuring integrity for students and staff. Along with that progress, we have a more inclusive, equitable, and relevant educational system, which identifies staff, strengthens the capacity building for students as a whole, and ensures schools are working in line with the realities in each territory. This strategy consolidates education as a tool for peace, social mobilization, and sustainable development, thus transforming the life of millions of Colombians and ensuring that social justice and opportunities for all underpins the country.
Now, before I give the floor to others to answer questions asked by Ms. Tato, and apologies for mispronouncing your name, says the speaker, we want to address the issue of the recommendations of the Ombudsman. But I want to say that we feel that they are of the highest authority. They are not binding in our legislation. The Ombudsman, be they man or woman, they are a high-ranking official and absolutely respected in our institutional system. Now, yesterday we quite rightly commemorated the first year of office of the first woman who has held the position of Ombudsman, Ms. Ortiz. And as part of this commemoration, we spoke about the origins and the work of the Ombudsman, initially considered to be a small-scale institution. And they were mainly simply collecting complaints at the beginning. And over time, it has developed, and it has become increasingly independent and autonomous within the system, and has begun to receive the sufficient resources for it to become fully operational. So it enjoys the appreciation of the citizenry, and it has the full respect and recognition of other institutional bodies. So let me repeat, its recommendations are not, formally speaking, binding, but they are respected and abided by the state authorities. Now, I want to give the floor to a member of my delegation on education and the armed conflict. Thank you, Your Excellency, Madam Chair and committee members. I wanted to add to what the ambassador has just been telling you, by referring to the questions on children in armed conflict in Colombia. Colombia recognizes children are social actors with their own will from the moment of birth, and they need support in order to fully exercise their rights. So children lie at the very heart of national policies, and there are special protection measures ensuring the progressive enjoyment of their rights in accordance with their developing skills and capacities. The best interest of the child is key for Colombia, and we have public policies and put in place actions to protect their rights pursuant to Article 44 of our Constitution, which says, children's fundamental rights are the right to life, physical integrity, health, balanced food, their name and nationality, having a family, not to be separated from them, care and love, education and culture, leisure, and the free expression of their opinions. And that is a quote. The Constitutional Court has established in its case law that children are subject to specific constitutional protection. They must be able to live their lives in safe environments with effective access to health, education, justice, especially in the context of armed conflict. So the National Development Plan, from this viewpoint, by means of Law 2294, also puts in place measures on decent work, saying that there must be an end to discrimination at work, child labor, and discrimination against children. And we want to build a generation for peace and have a program here, and we want children to be beloved and have opportunities. We have a national childhood policy of 2018-2030, which will help fully developed children and put in place their welfare, ensure they have equal opportunities, and make sure that they are participating in the development of the country. We also have family support policies that want to recognize and promote family opportunities, because we recognize they are actors of social development. We also reaffirm our commitment to the Committee on the Rights of the Child, and we have a child-centered policy. I also wanted to swiftly mention Colombia's accession to the Declaration on Safe Schools in November 2022. In December of the following year, 2023, in the Arauca region, the government presented a national program on safe schools to protect children in armed conflict areas, ensuring that they can have ongoing education and a protected right to education at all levels, local, regional, national, and with citizens' participation. The Safe Schools Declaration is a way for us to strengthen the national policies that we have on education and child protection. The National Plan on Safe Schools looks at prevention and comprehensive protection of children in areas most affected by armed conflict. The impact of armed conflict on education poses many challenges, because often educational facilities are used as headquarters or barracks. And all of this means that many children are deprived of their right to education and therefore don't have the basis to develop their future lives. We want to ensure that educational facilities are safe spaces, and aware of this challenge, many activities have been planned as part of the Safe Schools Declaration, and we can give you more information in writing on schools. To conclude, the Ministry for Foreign Affairs since 2012 began a comprehensive children and opportunities policy or programs. This ran until 2018. We have 18 safe centers where children between 6 and 17 carry out sporting and leisure activities to make the most of their free times. These play schools or play houses are part of our efforts to promote schools, to promote creative skills and have exchanges between children. After having been built, these playhouses have often taken on local authority roles. There are 30 local authorities in rural areas in 19 different departments that have such playhouses. They are still operational today, and the Ministry of Foreign Affairs continues to provide safe spaces to ensure that children can continue to exercise their right to education. Thank you.
Le doy la palabra al doctor David.
I now give the floor to the representative of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Distinguished committee members, now still on access to education for the migrant population. Colombia is firmly committed to ensuring the full enjoyment of the right to education for all persons that live in our territory. And as a priority, this includes the migrant population. We have clear policies to ensure access, well-being, and the ongoing presence of migrants in our educational system. A significant element of process is a comprehensive registration program for schooling without the need for Colombian documents. And this is supported by the temporary status for migrants, which is granted, and other domestic rules. This is a status which aims to include Venezuelan migrants, to reduce xenophobia and discrimination, and to make sure that they can transit to a regular migratory station. As of July 2022, 1.8 million Venezuelans had been involved in this program, and more than 1 million carried out the household survey, and more than 1 million temporary protection grants were applied, and many were granted. Up to 2024, 611,000 students with Venezuelan nationality were registered in the education system. 35% of them, that is 211,000, were identified as not having valid documents in Colombia, but this represented an elimination of the barriers standing in the way of them accessing education. Very many students are registered in this way, mainly in the center, east, and Caribbean coast of the country. Between 2022 and 2024, there are 26,000 students. And Circular 38 of November 2023 updated the guidelines to ensure access to basic, middle school and higher education for migrants, ensuring that education is now fully recognized as a basic right in Colombia for them. The Ministry of Education has also promoted a comprehensive approach for the welcome and inclusion of migrant population. We now have even more measures. We have specific measures to welcome migrant students and have an inclusive environment. We've been promoting strategic alliances, and we manage about 31 billion pesos for 2024, which meant that we've been able to set up provision of school furniture and generally improve the facilities. We also had Resolution 6519 of 2025, which includes the provision of specific protocols to ensure education services in migration, mobility, and transit situations. These are protocols which aim to streamline the administrative requirements and to ensure that there is an easier cultural, social, and language integration of students. All of this dovetails with other sectors, health, and well-being, and also promoting cohesion in host communities. And there's also the question of displaced communities and education. We continue to broaden and extend the victim law through strategic measures that try and make sure that there are adapted academic paths, that the needs of displaced persons as a result of the armed conflict can be met. There is a comprehensive risk management policy for adopted by means of 6529 decision of 2025, which specifically aims to protect the educational development of children as well as young people and adults, safeguarding their lives and protecting their rights, including displacement and other measures. So there are special protocols and adaptations for emergency situations. We've also been looking at capacity building within educational officials, looking at recovery. And there are protocols to ensure the right to education for persons in migration, transit, or mobility. There is a streamlining of administrative requirements and all of this ensuring better cultural and social integration for this part of the population. Thank you. Let me give the floor to Dr. Cuartas. Thank you, Your Excellency. The measures taken by Colombia for displaced persons is what I now want to address. Let's remember that the peace agreement point 5 is victim-centered. There is a specific law which lays down that victims of the armed conflict, including those who are displaced, have the right to freely access education at preschool, basic, and middle school level. And they can access this in official state educational facilities if families don't have sufficient resources to do this. There is a specific focus on education. Decree 525 of 2025 provides for a humanitarian approach, ensuring that measures for attention and care to victims are in place with the cooperation of different state authorities. We have also bolstered the Higher Education Fund for Victims. This is a fund managed by CESCR, and it offers educational grants for victims of the armed conflict. It makes it easier for them to access higher education. And for 2024, in real terms, there was a 6.5% increase in the resources allocated to this fund from 98 billion to 105 billion granted to CESCR. Now, we also have differentiated programs that have been put in place. This has been managed by the Ombudsman's Office. And these are programs which target the specific needs of displaced persons, looking at institutional, family, and community measures. Now, dissemination strategies. We have run awareness-raising campaigns to disseminate information amongst communities of displaced persons. They're provided with information on available educational programs and the procedures to access them. Now, what I can say about institutional cooperation is that the government has built alliances with educational institutions, with non-governmental organizations, and with international bodies in order to broaden educational provision and to ensure that it is sustainable over time. Thank you very much, Madam Chair, and that concludes our answers to this section.
Thank you. Thank you, Your Excellency. The floor is open now to take questions, follow-up questions from colleagues. I noticed that Ms. Laura Kratineta too, followed by Mr. Bouzid, and then Ms. Peji Chen and Ms. Rossi. Also Mr. Furio. Since we have just 10 minutes, I request colleagues to please ration your time and be quick but precise. Thank you. Ms. Tatu, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Madam Chairperson. And also, I would like to thank the delegation for some of the replies which we received so far. And just personally to express a regret that a representative for the Ministry of Education was not included in your delegation. And I will just like to go back maybe to some of the questions which I haven't raised in a proper way because of the lack of time. And also to insist on some of the questions which I raised with your delegation. So the first issue on which I want to go back is el Plan Especial de Educación Rural that runs until 2031. My question was how this plan was implemented so far and how it concretely contributed to the reducing the gap between urban and rural areas in respect of access to education, educational attainment, quality of education, and reducing of dropout rates. Then regarding your response to the question related to the recommendations of El Defensor del Pueblo, I understand that these are important recommendations, although they are not binding within your legal system, which is the case for most of the legal systems indeed. But that you value them very much. So my concrete question is what you did with those recommendations. Did the Ministry of Education implemented any of those recommendations? In which way? So if that happened. Then I would like to go back to our list of issues. And reiterate some of our requests under the list of issues. So we requested to the state party to indicate measures taken to improve the quality and pertinence of the primary and secondary education and prevent the school dropouts, as well as concrete results of these measures. So would it be possible to provide for the last 5 years statistical data disaggregated by urban and rural areas, particularly as regards access to education, retainment in the school system of children belonging to indigenous and Afro-Colombian communities, and also measures taken by the state party to ensure access to education during COVID, especially in respect of indigenous and Afro-Colombian communities. And although I would have loved also to hear your answers in respect of el Plan Decenal de Lenguas Nativas, el Plan Nacional de Desarrollo de Lenguas y Protocolo de Mediación Lingüístico con el Pueblo, NUCAC, their implementation, I will stop here and leave the floor also for my colleagues. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Mr. Bouzid, you have the floor, sir.
Thanks, Madam Chair. According to some reports between our hands, children and youth with disabilities in Colombia face significant exclusion from the mainstream education. The percentage is around 90%. My question is, what concrete actions will the government take to ensure equal access to quality inclusive education for children and youth with disabilities? Thanks.
Thank you, sir. Ms. Peji Chen, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Also thank the delegation for the answer to provide some more information. I have 2 points. Well, it's it's very impressed that in your core report, it stated peace, justice, and education are the three cornerstones of the policy. And also in the state report, paragraph 233, said that the education accounts for the largest proportion of the budget. I think that's very good, very impressed. The question is following my colleague's previous question, also about the enrollment. In the core report, paragraph 33, table 8, shows that from 2004 to 2012, the enrollment rate of the high schools has been increasing year by year. But while the enrollment rate of primary schools has been decreasing year by year. So it's interesting because generally looking that primary school, the enrollment is higher than middle and high school. But just comparably with itself, so it's interesting. So I would like to know what's the reason and what measures taken to improve the situation and what's the current situation. My second question is also about the education. In the state report, paragraph 97 and 98, refer to some action plans, such as families in action, the youth in action. That's good. Please provide information on the effect of such action. For example, family actions aimed at eliminating poverty with the condition that children can continue to go to school. So are there any improvements in keeping attending school by this kind of action? Could you provide the relevant data to indicating such improvements? Besides the funding amount mentioned in paragraph 107. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Ms. Rossi.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The delegate mentioned the work that it's doing to promote the alternative use of the coca leaf and to protect traditional knowledge and work. And you've also mentioned the global process to revise the coca leaf classification, work done by WHO, amongst others, to revise its classification under 1961, submitted by Bolivia, supported by Colombia. So my question is whether you're taking measures to ensure the significant participation of indigenous peoples in this review and then in the vote within the Drugs Commission at the United Nations. Then I also have a question about popular consultations. Now, we've asked questions and had some information, but we're wondering about the legal framework governing this process. In 2018, a constitutional court ruling rather weakened this, and we've also received information about the Colosa project in Cajamarca. This is a rather textbook case where in 2017, the majority of the population rejected the gold mining project, but the company was trying to avoid recognizing and abiding by this decision. So I wonder whether you could provide any information about this case and also provide any information about this weakening effect of the 2018 Constitutional Court ruling. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Fiorio. We don't have much time left, but as the country rapporteur, of course, if you could just kindly be brief. Thank you.
Muchas gracias, la presidencia.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. I have specific questions. First of all, bearing in mind the alarming number of recruitments in schools, I have two questions. First of all, I know that in Colombia there is a specific legal framework sanctioning this practice of child recruitment in order to implement Article 4 of the optional protocol of the Convention on the Rights of the Child relating to the participation of children in armed conflict. And then my second question is whether you have any special policy to re-include and reintegrate children who've been forcibly recruited to make sure that they can return to school. Could the state, furthermore, provide information about teacher salaries in Colombia? Are they competitive? How do these salaries compare to the minimum wage or even the average wage in Colombia? Is there a teacher career plan? And finally, how many teachers in a specific area does Colombia have?
Thank you. Your Excellency, we've come to the end of the questions, so you now have 20 minutes to kindly respond.
Gracias, señora presidenta.
Thank you, Madam Chair. We'll try and answer these questions in the time available. And to do so, I'll give the floor to Santiago Salinas from the Ministry of Equality, particularly to answer questions on education for persons with disabilities.
Procuraré responder muy rápido.
I will try and answer very briefly so we can make the best use of time. First of all, I wanted to say that the National Development Plan in Article 130 provides for the need to step up resources to ensure there is equality and fairness in accessing higher education, particularly for persons with disabilities. So a minimum fund, a standing fund, was established for 115 persons, periodically renewed, and this provides a complete subsidy for the higher education of these persons if they are living with a disability. We have also approved an indigenous-owned education system. This is one of the differentiated systems for accessing education, and this runs from the basic education to higher education. And we have supported 47 projects for an investment of 57 billion for own education. 14 territories and 77 local authorities have benefited from these. 3,600 students have been able to benefit from this in the past year. We also have access to higher education, 23,000 young indigenous peoples, 21,000 students from Black communities, and 135,000 young people from the group of victims. And all of these activities have been put in forward by the national authorities in order to broaden access to basic and higher education. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Salinas. I'd now like to pass the floor to Dr. Castiblanco from the Ministry of Culture, please. Thank you very much, Your Excellency, and thank you very much once again for the questions concerning the National Decade for Indigenous Languages. I'd like to repeat that the national government has prioritised cultural rights on an unprecedented basis with investments over $1 billion. And this has allowed the government to focus particularly on democratisation and decentralisation across the different municipalities and territories. We've invested to date this year 7 billion pesos. We're working with 46 indigenous people, with the Rayasel people, with the Palenquero people and the Roma people, precisely to ensure the safeguarding of and protection of linguistic heritage of Indigenous peoples. It's also very important to highlight herein that we're working to ensure we're hand in glove with the Ibero-American Languages Institute, with the Community of the Andes and the Organization for Amazonian Cooperation on specific points relating to the preservation of indigenous languages, within which it's the indigenous peoples themselves that are really leading the projects. I'd also like to take the opportunity to share some of the information asked of us concerning support, concerning destigmatization of coca leaf. I want to say that the methodology under the safeguard plans relates directly to the work we are doing with the peoples themselves. And so we've located this issue in COP16, particularly, which provided an opportunity to establish a roadmap through the incorporation of creative and popular economy connected to coca leaf production in the country. And so that's specifically what we'd like to mention. But in so doing, I'd like to, if you'll forgive me, take the opportunity to say that we are working particularly on violence prevention processes, particularly with regard to GBV, and cultural work vis-a-vis women's bodies is very important here, including as well detainees and inmates and their rights, and working particularly with projects aimed at combating violence against trans people as well, particularly. Thank you very much. David Diaz, please, on the rural education plan, education in rural areas in general and other issues. Thank you, Your Excellency, distinguished committee members. In Colombia, the Special Rural Education Plan, which is PEER by its Spanish acronym, is a tool to guide the planning of rural education in the short, medium and long term, allowing it to be a cornerstone for education in rural areas. Its structure is strategic as well as its aims and guidelines, and these all take account of the commitments made through the peace agreement, and they guide the implementation of the different goals that the national government has established pursuant to a reading of the reality in rural areas and what's expected of education for their development. The Ministry of National Education has consolidated this policy as a fundamental pillar to reduce educational disparities in rural areas, with projections up to 2031 in terms of plans. Its key principle is based on 5 components, around which today we are clustering the different actions guided to supporting rural areas under the aegis of the ministry, the Education Ministry. The components are the following. The first is comprehensive support for the early years. The aim of this is to ensure universal early years coverage with a focus on children's needs from reception up to 6 years of age in rural areas in the country. This strengthens the focus on maternal and child health and mortality, and focuses a comprehensive curriculum hand in hand with promoting curricula, the promotion of cultural rights in the early years, and the strengthening of access and quality to recreation for the early years. The second component is educational quality strategies from preschool up to middle years. The aim of this is to strengthen educational strategies aimed at children, teenagers and young people in this portion of education, preschool, primary and middle years, underneath specific criteria which are in line with the characteristics and requirements of rural areas across the country. The third component is well-being in the education system in rural areas. The aim here is to consolidate conditions favouring the well-being of the population going through the educational system, ensuring we have quality and fostering school environments in line with the rural context to contribute to the education of people living there. This relates to activities ensuring free provision of early years, primary and middle years education, improving school infrastructure, school foods programs, school transportation and school residences for children who live in remote areas. The fourth component relates to an inclusive higher education in rural areas. The aim here is to promote access and permanence of young people coming from rural areas by bolstering public high school education. This involves innovative approaches and projects and fostering rural education in this area, as well as the strengthening of capacity building for rural development across the whole country. The final component relates to intersectoral institutional strengthening and alliances. This is a cross-cutting component, and this ensures that we have a target to strengthen, create connections, and identify specific roadmaps on the basis of and tailored to the specific needs and requirements of each rural area. This is done through institutional management projects with certified local institutions and the consolidation of intersectorality and alliances in this area, as well as innovative policies aimed to ensure IT technology is capitalized on as a cross-cutting element in rural education to modernize it, as well as to ensure the empowerment of all people to ensure the future of rural education. We've had significant progress in a number of areas. The initial educational strategy benefited 1,500,000 children in specific areas with support, information support for 63 teachers groups in the first period of July 2024 through to the same month 2025. The educational improvement program strengthened the abilities of 32 educational secretariats and 34 high schools. 12 processes were begun with communities of people of African descent and indigenous peoples, and the itinerant educational program managed to reach 10,400 children in the most remote areas in the country. The educational support for middle and high school years allowed the return of 3,800 young people in rural areas to education in 2024, with 545 new temporary teaching roles for 2025, in addition to strengthening technical middle years vocational training for agriculture and fishing in 56 institutions. We also had 894 technical advisors in rural centers with an approximate investment of 68 billion pesos. The rate for early years support was taken to 52% in 2024 in this way, and the rural school meals program continues to be strengthened, benefiting 200,000 children in rural areas. This includes school transportation as well. With regards to the concerns raised in terms of school dropout, Colombia is profoundly committed to guaranteeing the right to education, and we've achieved significant progress in preventing school dropouts. The data demonstrates a positive trend in the drop in the rate of this, which went from 3.93% in 2023 to 3.36% in 2024. This represents a reduction in dropouts, which went to over 200,000 in 2024. There were an increase from 7.2 to 7.6 million students impacted by this program year on year, and this is a demonstration of the strategies implemented to ensure retention in our schools. There's 62% now of our educational establishments affected. For example, in Barranquilla, we saw a reduction of 2.42% in 2022, and this went down to 1.6% in terms of dropouts in 2024. In Funso, it went from 2.92% to 1.62%. In Inarubia, it went from over 2% to 1.6%. In the same period, we nonetheless recognize that we still have significant challenges in rural areas where the armed conflict has led to continuous interruption in education and an increase in dropout rates, 13% in some conflict areas. And this is by way of contrast to 6% across the entire national territory. Thank you very much, says the head of delegation. I'd like to pass the floor to 3 other colleagues with your permission. With regards to Tumaco, $1,400 million worth of investment went into the university sector in Amarillo. This benefited around 1,000 students per semester, while the coverage of education in rural areas in higher education went up by 16.6% in 2024, with 22,900 students who were matriculated in 104 municipalities and 164 additional training sectors. In El Chaco, we managed for a second year running to have 100% coverage of our food meals program, PAI. This demonstrates, I think, the government's commitment to the early years and young people in remote territories, and particularly in Colombia. Strengthening ongoing training and education programs and supporting academic centers for the displaced population and in conflict areas is a fundamental part of this government's policy, with a view to overcoming and responding to the crisis in those territories. Thank you very much. Ambassador Barayaye, please. Thank you very much. Yes, to respond to the question put by Madam Rossi regarding the participation of indigenous peoples in the process supporting Colombia initiated by Bolivia concerning the reclassification of coca leaf. I'd like to say that indeed during COP16, first of all, we created a space where we could hear from indigenous peoples from the Amazon territories with regards to this issue. And subsequently in January of this year, 2025, we opened up a dialogue in Mitu with the support of civil society organizations and the OHCHR. And this allowed us to open up a dialogue with indigenous communities and hear their observations and comments concerning this process. And I would highlight that last week, if I'm not mistaken, Colombia submitted the information required by the WHO in a questionnaire, which included a lot of the information which we obtained during that dialogue. And on the 20th of October, we will have a hearing at the WHO, a session there where we will hear about this with Colombia as a concerned state. And we know that obviously the WHO has continuing open doors on an ongoing basis to civil society and other participants. So we do hope we'll have representatives there from indigenous peoples as well. Thank you. Thank you very much. Dr. Lavijera, please. Thank you very much, Your Excellency. With regards to the question concerning recruitment, the Ministry of Education implemented a raft of actions to prevent forced recruitment and violence against children and young people in context of armed conflict on the basis of its public policy and risk management in educational centres and emergency response, pursuant to Resolution 9000 of 2024. We try and have a comprehensive response from our educational community to respond to the context of the armed conflict. The Ministry of Education participated in the Intersectoral Commission for the Prevention of Recruitment and Use of Children in Armed Conflict, and this aims to coordinate efforts and we have 24 educational establishments in zones such as Nariño, Norte, Santander, to receive additional educational and resource support. In terms of training of teachers, the Ministry of Education has set this as a central priority. Thanks to this new focus, more than 80,000 teachers had an improvement in salary between 2022 and 2025. This represents a historic investments of over 2.1 billion. There were 103 teachers who have now benefited from this program, and in addition, according to a survey, a large percentage of those teachers say that they've experienced an increase in well-being as a result of this, and additional pedagogical support has been further amended. This has generated an estimated cost of millions of pesos. 69,000 teachers benefited from this in 2024, and this represented another significant investment. So we have gone from 45 billion in 2022 to 103 billion in 2025. This has led to better quality and more opportunities. Finally, in terms of access to education for indigenous people and those of African descent, we've managed to achieve progress in access and permanence of Afro-Colombians and indigenous children in our centres, fostering inclusive educational environments. Our program in this area was made official under a decree in 2025, following 8 years of consultation, and comprehensive support for the population has led to an increase in the number of students, 180,000 in 2025. We've signed 14 conventions with local indigenous peoples to ensure local empowered education, and between 2023 and 2024, that's led to a significant increase in the number of indigenous people involved. In terms of children of African descent, we have additional agreements covering 26,000 students. Both populations have benefited from programs such as the comprehensive middle years and high school programs, which have ensured returns to classes of more than 3,000 students in rural areas, and 25,039 indigenous students have also benefited from that. Food meals programs has now reached 83% in 2024, benefiting 5,800,000 students. And the implementation of our Education Grows strategy, with its racial elements as well incorporated in curriculum, has also been fostered across schools in order to combat racism on ethnic grounds across the whole of Colombia. Thank you. Thank you very much, Chair. That brings us to a conclusion for this segment, and we'll try and submit any answers in writing in terms of any further pending questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Your Excellency. You've really been very positive in your approach to our constructive dialogue with you, and really appreciate your very thorough and well-prepared response by you and your delegation. We've now come to the close of our meeting, and I would request our country rapporteur, Mr. Furier, to please make his closing remarks. Since we're running out of time, Mr. Furier, if you could kindly be brief. Thank you.
Thank you very much to the Chair for the floor. As we reach the end of our dialogue, I'd like to take the opportunity to thank our delegation through the head of delegation, ambassador and permanent representative of Colombia to the United Nations in Geneva. I'd also like to highlight our appreciation of the effort made by the delegation in general, and highlight the participation of Madam Gloria Cuartas, Director of the Implementation Unit of the Peace Agreement. In terms of the cross-cutting nature of her work, we really appreciate the responses she's given to the committee, as well as your preparedness for constructive dialogue. I'd also like to recognize the participation of civil society organizations, those from the UN system and the Ombudsman's Office as well, who have contributed to this process, and particularly those who have joined us in the room. My thanks also go to the chair of the committee and to the Secretariat who have supported this dialogue. And I'm also very grateful to the committee members themselves for their work, who have dealt with the different clusters of questions which have been extremely relevant. And my thanks also go to the colleagues who presented additional questions, which were all very relevant. Finally, last but not least, I'd like to thank the interpreters for their work. They've supported our work with their always very kind and robust efforts to ensure clear and precise communication, bearing in mind the number of questions and the very specific data we are exchanging. This is extremely important for the committee's work. I'd also like to highlight the importance, obviously, of this communication and ensuring that the questions and responses are as accurate as possible. We're very grateful for that. I'd also, at this point, like to wish all the very best to the delegation and to the Colombian government moving forwards as they look at implementing the outcomes of this dialogue. In terms of the forthcoming report, of course, but also in terms of the follow-up process to the outcomes of this dialogue. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Furio, Your Excellency. If you'd like to make some closing remarks.
Gracias.
Thank you very much, Chairperson. Well, allow me to reiterate the Colombian government's thanks for the fantastic work that you carry out in this committee in general and in relation to Colombia in particular. Your interest and your depth of analysis in relation to contexts of great importance are appreciated, and we're very attentive to your observations. Your comments will be very useful for our progress. We're very well aware that we have a significant challenge. Our country has been confronting a human rights crisis, which is a major crisis for some time now, and the current government's commitment lies in adopting the correct policies to overcome that crisis. It's not going to be possible, of course, to do that all at once, but the guidelines that you hand to us are very important in that process. Allow me to take this opportunity to say that it's often been said that, of course, Colombia's had a number of peace processes, all of them significant, the last of which took place in 2016, and these are incredibly significant, and that particular one extremely significant. And that sets up the Truth Commission that presented its report to the current president as president-elect, because at the time, the incumbent president didn't want to receive the report in 2022. And the Truth Commission, in brief, highlighted that in Colombia, we have a discriminatory mentality rooted in the period of conquest and colonial period. And that, of course, was rooted in dispossession of lands. And this was in large part affected by state agencies, paramilitary actors and guerrillas, and related to drugs trafficking. This has led to a diseased society which lacks trust, which is imperfect, and a civilian population severely impacted by war. To respond to these problems identified in those findings, the Commission recommended at the time, and continues to recommend, that we act on 8 priority areas. First of all, consolidate peace, dismantling persistent armed groups, and that explains the current policy to seek total peace in addition to the 2016 agreement. And also to guarantee justice for victims through effective investigations into human rights violations and humanitarian law violations. Secondly, that we should restore the dignity of victims, recognizing the state's responsibility and providing reparation to rights violations. This is very connected to economic, social, and cultural rights, of course. Thirdly, that revitalize democracy through a national pact on violence, guaranteeing citizens' participation in the protection of social leaders and protectors of human rights. Fourthly, that we regulate drugs properly instead of prohibiting them, and guarantee sustainable development of communities producing crops considered to date to be illegal. Fifth, overcome impunity with significant support from the international community. Sixth, that we transform, also with the support of the international community, the security agencies protecting the population, and that this should no longer be considered, as it was to date, the enemy within. Sixth, that we reframe the rural realities in the country, overcoming barriers and ensuring positive discrimination to support those in the most abandoned territories, neglected territories. Also, finally, that we ensure that a culture of peace is sown across the country to replace the culture of war that has prevailed in the country to date. Gustavo Petro, the president, as president-elect, received that report before he took up post. He did that in public, and he committed to complying with those goals. And this now provides a guide for us, a fundamental guide for the development of the current government's activities. And in that vein, we have promoted reforms to health, the labour market, pensions, and we have highlighted the importance and relevance of social rights, economic, social and cultural rights of the population, which were ignored for so long, for so many years and centuries, as a result of the context which the Truth Commission described so eloquently. Thank you very much for your support on this road. You're very kind.
Thank you, Your Excellency, for your closing remarks and for sharing your insights into the internal developments within Colombia. And we wish you and the people of your country all the best in your endeavors. It has really, we have had a better understanding out of your briefing to us, as well as from the delegation. I also want to join our country rapporteur, thanking you, your delegation, conference services, dear colleagues, everyone else, our interpreters, for all their assistance and good work. I wish you all very good travel back home. Excellency, just a quick reminder, as our country rapporteur pointed out, at the end we will be issuing concluding observations, and we will identify 3 specific issues for follow-up and report within the next 2 years. I just thought I'll highlight that for your attention. And with that, we close this meeting. Our committee will be meeting in a closed meeting at 3 o'clock, and wish you a happy lunch and safe travels back home. Thank you very much. Meeting is closed.